Ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
It's Ticklish Business, the podcast devoted to honoring and deconstructing the world of classic cinema. As always, I'm your host, Kristen Lopez. This episode, co-host Drea Clark and I enter the back alleys and shadowy world of film noir to discuss 1944's Murder, My Sweet, both part of the Centennial celebration honoring Anne Shirley, as well as honoring our favorite month, Noir-vember.
If I hadn't been in my office that night with my brain cells playing hide and seek with those dizzy flashes down the street, I'd have never got messed up with a stolen jade necklace.
I've never hired a detective before. What are the rates?
As much as the traffic will bear.
When can you start?
I've already started. Well, this looked like something to rub your palms about. But my client's lovely stepdaughter had other ideas.
What did she ask you to do?
She wanted me to kiss her and find a jade necklace.
Whatever she was willing to pay you, I'll up it. Just stay away from her. Forget the whole thing.
It sounded screwy, but it's a funny thing. I always follow through on a sale, even if it pays dividends in a broken skull.
I am your host, Kristen Lopez, here with the lovely and amazing Drea Clark. Drea, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. It's turning into fall, which is nice.
I was going to say, it's fall now, and we're getting knee-deep into Noir-vember. As we talk about 1944's Murder, My Sweet, we're also honoring Centennial celebrant Anne Shirley. This was her final film. She retired at the ripe old age of 26.
I know, that always surprises me, but then you read about her childhood and realize how long her career was for a woman who retired at 26. Like, she did it. She got out of there. Then she lived, like, a long, wonderful life on her own terms.
Yeah, one not filled with, like, sadness and the Hollywood story that you expect.
I mean, child actors from any era it's a rough road for them, and she really took that by the reins and decided, nope, I'm done. And she does such a lovely job in this too. She's just the beautiful every girl. You know, it was a choice that she made. She could definitely have had a career.
Well, before we get to Anne Shirley and Murder, My Sweet, I wanted us to talk about the big classic film to-do that happened this week. Filmstruck is closing. Oh. If you don't know, Filmstruck is the collaboration between Turner Classic Movies and the Criterion Collection. It was originally promoted as a way to access Criterion films as well as art house, world cinema, obscure cult films, and then within the last year, it's become a place for one of the only places, I think, if you don't have a cable subscription to TCM and you can't watch the Watch TCM app, you were able to watch some select things from TCM on Filmstruck. And they had a great set of bonus features and curated content, rare stuff you couldn't find anywhere else. Well, because AT&T and Time Warner have merged, both big corporations don't feel that there is any benefit to the 12 million subscribers that Filmstruck has. And so they were closing it. If they all had $1, that would be $12 million. So at $10.99 a month times 12 million, I mean, I guess if you're a big corporation, you can afford to turn your nose up at that. But it's going to close on November 29th, and everybody is feverishly trying to watch as much as they can. And I just wanted to talk about it a little bit before we got into the discussion. I came to Filmstruck late, even though I am enmeshed with what's going on at TCM. And I remember when they opened it up, I didn't immediately jump on Filmstruck because I was like, okay, it's just another place to get the Criterion Collection, which at the time was also on Hulu. And I had Hulu, so I was like, okay, that's covered for me. And I don't watch, I know it's terrible and elitist of me to say, but I don't watch a lot of foreign cinema as much as I should. That probably sounds like an excuse because it is. But when they decided to start incorporating TCM stuff, I finally decided to buy into it. And I've really enjoyed it because I think what a lot of people who don't have TCM miss is the intros and outros, that curation of having TCM stuff that they can watch. And having the Robert Osborne intros and Alicia Malone's introductions and these analysis of the films available was the next best thing. It's frustrating to me that it shouldn't be frustrating because they're a corporation. What do we expect? But it is frustrating that there is no interest in saving these films because, as we all know, the Hollywood studios don't want to save these films. There are movies languishing in their vaults right now, thousands of them, because they don't feel there's any return on investment to producing them. It reminds me always that the outsiders who love classic cinema, much like music, will go to that underground that exists online to find these movies. I just want us to be smarter, more informed film people. Why is that so hard? What's your thoughts on Filmstruck and them closing?
We can't have good things. I had a similar late arrival to it. I think part of it is because as someone who loves films and watches them as avidly as I do, I was under the belief that I already had access to a lot of the types of films that Filmstruck had, which is erroneous. They have so many titles. We're still in present.
They're still here until the 29th, so I think we can stick with present.
Present tense. There's so many things on there to explore and to discover, and I think that's where the inherent, it's either snobbery or almost like artistic laziness of the casual movie watcher who can enjoy contemporary films but is wary of both either films with subtitles or films before a certain date, with the assumption that they won't be able to connect with them. And that's heartbreaking because you can watch something and be like, oh no, it doesn't matter if it's has the same structure or polish or whatever of recognizable contemporary film, but there is so much enjoyment and so much depth and texture. We talk about Murder My Sweet. That's a great example of something that, and obviously a less obscure title, but of a film that I feel I could show any current movie lover who's apprehensive. Some people won't watch things in black and white, which blows my mind. So on one hand, you have your casual viewers that weren't getting in the Filmstruck queue, and then you have the people that it was maybe made for or were just adjacent to who it was made for that didn't utilize it in the way that they should have and will probably regret. I'm a little torn about it. There's so much on there, and tied with the idea of losing so much physical media, and what we just won't have access to so many films at a certain point. And that is scary, artistically scary, culturally scary.
And a lot of people's response tends to be, oh, this is why you need physical media. This is why you need to invest in DVDs and Blu-rays. And that's a bit of a privileged statement. Because as we all know, space and money tend to be the problem. I know that I don't buy a lot of DVDs and Blu-rays of stuff that I want because I don't have the space for them. I would turn into a hoarder if I bought everything that I really wanted. And so having that ability to watch something on demand is really nice because you don't have to worry about, is it going to fit in my DVD shelf or not? And also, as I just mentioned too, these studios aren't even bothering to release these movies. How many of those Criterion titles on Filmstruck, I actually looked, several of them are not available on Criterion disc. They're not pressed because Criterion doesn't feel that there's a cachet for that title. Even Criterion, which is a company that is built on preserving these films, is only going to make something that they think has a recognizable name that is going to make them money. It's why Warner Archive, and I hope I don't jinx this, it's why Warner Archive is still in business, because they're not losing massive amounts of money because they manufacture on demand. So they don't have excess content lying around. And that's why you need some of these streaming services, because there's just not this interest in preserving anything on a physical product unless there's a big name associated for it. I remember in 2009 when they were talking about John Wayne's The Alamo and how it was just festering in the MGM vault. And if they didn't restore it within a year, the 70 millimeter print that they had, the only one in existence, was going to be destroyed. I don't know what happened with that. Last I checked, nobody had put up any money. So unless you are a big company like a studio that is going to put the money out to restore these things and put them out on a DVD, they just languish. I love Veronica Lake. So many of her movies are in a Paramount vault somewhere. They don't bother to release them. Fox used to do a DVD on-demand service, and they don't do that anymore. Universal is very sporadic in what they release. So, I just kind of am banging my head against the wall saying, like, what can I do at this point to get access to certain things that aren't available?
And it's really hard, I think, for people to wrap their heads around film preservation and the idea it's not even just languishing, it's disintegrating somewhere. That the media that we have, because we very quickly have become used to a modern world, that we think that, it will be accessible to us at some point. But unless you have someone putting up the streaming services and someone taking care of those and someone archiving things correctly, the amount of films that you can casually say, unfortunately, it's not available anymore. And that's such a strange forever statement to be said about something that was a piece of art made with the assumption that it would continue on. It's a very heady spiral you can go into thinking about it.
I said this on another podcast. I wish that there was like a Megan Ellison level figure, somebody with deep pockets that could just come in and be like, I want to save this movie, restore it.
Yeah.
You need like a Steve Jobs of classic film almost, and restore these movies, because unfortunately these movies are going to become the record industry. Import music. If anybody remembers, and I'm going to date myself here, if anybody remembers like the late 80s, early 90s, when you wanted certain music but you couldn't get it, you had to scour either early internet and like download it off of LimeWire or something and make a tape or make a CD, and it sounded really crappy. I feel like that's where we're going to be with movies. One legal source to watch a lot of these things is YouTube. Mm-hmm. YouTube uploads a lot of weird stuff. Some of it's in 10-minute increments. They're not restored, so grain is a problem, but you have access to them. There are sites, some less legal than others, that you can find if you really want to dig. And I feel that's where we're at now.
And thankfully, Canopy as well always surprises me by the kind of range of things that they have.
I wish my library did Canopy. I've been hearing about it for the last month, and my library does not have access to it. No.
Oh, I just assumed, like an idiot, that everyone did. Oh, wow, because
I guess it's all based on Canopy and Hoopla are the two that I get told a lot. And your library has to subscribe to it. My library sucks.
Oh, wow.
Because it doesn't do either.
Oh, that is unfortunate. Like, I very casually got to watch The Umbrellas of Cherbourg last week.
That's such a good movie.
Because it was on Canopy. I truly did it because I was like, what can I watch that visually will make me happy?
That's about it.
Umbrellas of Cherbourg it is. Yeah.
That's about it.
Well, everyone should talk to their libraries about supporting Canopy in the interim, because there's some good stuff on there. And it's free with your library card.
Yes, and continue to support Filmstruck. I know every major celebrity, Bill Hader is campaigning heavily to get people to support it. There's a petition going around that Guillermo del Toro and Edgar Wright have been asking people to sign. I doubt it will do anything, but maybe we'll get an 11th hour reprieve. A pre-Christmas miracle. Who knows?
Oh, nice, nice.
It is November, which means we are using the term coined by Mariah Gates, Noirvember, looking at all things noir. So before we get into Murder My Sweet, Drea, what do you define as a noir? What are some of your favorite examples of noir?
It's interesting because I actually had recent discussions of this based on considered people's incorrect reading of film noir. Not incorrect. There's this thing when you start to apply neo-noir to things that I'm like, oh, this is just getting squirrely. What are you even talking about anymore? Because to me, noir is equal parts visual, character, and story in terms of paying attention to those things and having a distinctive feel. That there's such a beautiful attention to shadow and lighting, which makes sense when you're dealing with shadowy tales, and that the characters, because it so often comes from this place of literary quality to them, which I really like. Also with the use of voiceover, which isn't successful in many, genres, but is so beautiful in great noir. For me, my favorites are probably what are a lot of people's favorites. Like The Third Man is something, and as you know, I have a long established love of Joseph Cotton, so no surprise there.
I have not seen that one yet.
Oh, wow, that's fun for you. Because it's Graham Greene as well, who, if you're a reader, there's a natural inclination towards loving noir, I think, because there's so much beautiful dialogue and these descriptions. And obviously, you know, Raymond Chandler is someone that we'll talk about today. And Graham Greene is someone who just has beautiful work based on what he does. I'd put Touch of Evil in there. I sound like a real Orson Welles head now, but
Another one I have not seen.
Oh yeah, okay. Well,
I seem to skip Orson.
Good. I'm picking up the Orson, and you're probably picking up every single other thing. Well, on the Raymond Chandler tip, The Big Sleep. I mean,
oh, that's a good one.
I think that's maybe the Maltese Falcon's the first noir that I saw, and the first film, like classic Hollywood, that my dad introduced me to. Like, I remember us going and him picking up the VHS copy of it at the video store and being like, I'd like you to see this. And I was probably 11 or 12, but had already been like loving film. And so it was an interesting thing. The Big Sleep has the thriller. It has the
confusion.
Exactly. The confusion, the quotable lines, the detective fiction, but this beautiful, almost surreal shooting style. But then as soon as you start listing them, you could list forever. What about you?
Well, I define noir, yes, there are the stylistic choices you can make. The shadows, as you mentioned, the chiaroscuro lighting, the Venetian blinds, and the way dust just gets really artistic in these movies. I tend to go more with story choices, and I really like the cynicism that comes out. As we're dealing with the war years, as it's slowly starting to come to a close, I love how some really good noirs play with the concept of like fortune's wheel and fate and destiny. Mostly when it comes to men, as we see in this movie, this is about, much like Double Indemnity or even the Bogey Bacall noirs to a lesser extent, it's all about male horniness.
Yeah.
And how that gets them in trouble.
They really are.
Women are smarter in noirs. They truly are. The best noirs have a woman that is just 3 steps ahead of the guy that knows that he's a moron. And I know there's a lot of feminist writing about women in noirs as being indicative of male fears of feminine autonomy, but I also see a lot of noirs and the femme fatale character as just male fear of a woman being better than them. Women being the superior race, and how that is terrifying. That is a terrifying prospect. Women deciding that, you know what, they don't want to be mothers and wives anymore. They want to be independent, not have to worry about male need. That's what I like about noirs. And so some of my favorite noirs, I'm going to go with a Technicolor example, which might be a bit controversial, but one of my favorite noirs is Leave Her to Heaven.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
Oh, see, it's great. It's Gene Tierney. It's one of the most beautiful Leon Shamroy cinematography. It's one of the best Technicolor movies you can see. It's beautiful. She's beautiful. Everybody's beautiful. But the movie is all about Cornel Wilde's character being the world's worst husband. The fact that his relationship with his wife falls apart, yes, because she's a little crazy, but also because he's just really dense. I feel like he creates his own hell. And I know there are many people who don't consider that a noir. And that's what I also enjoy about the genre, because there are so many different definitions.
Yeah.
What I would say is a noir, somebody else would say, well, that's definitely not noir. In fact, I was looking through my big pile of movies that I have and thinking, what should I do for Noirvember? And I was sitting there like arguing with myself saying, I can't do this movie. It's a mystery. It's a thriller. It's not a noir. Noir is a very specific choice, but I don't know if everybody defines it in the same way. It's like a musical. I know it when I see it.
I think there's also a funny tendency too, because you have your Sam Spades and your Philip Marlowes, to pigeonhole noir as being something that's detective based. But then you look in some of the most iconic, and to me, like DOA or Double Indemnity, that are crime related, but it's not the same. A man figuring things out and following clues.
I know a lot of people don't consider Don't Bother to Knock a noir.
Oh.
I would definitely consider that a noir. It's crime-based. It's got that lighting and that whole emphasis on the past and the cynicism. But again, I think that's what makes the genre so unique. A musical, you're really arguing about how much music is too much music. A Western, you don't have that argument because you know the basic tenets of what makes a Western. Noir, the definitions are so scattered, and I love that because it really opens you up to watching different things.
And it's such a good avenue into exploring how a film looks and what the actual story is can be equally important and equally inspiring, and which people can take over into other genres.
Well, we're talking about an example that most people would consider noir. It's actually listed as a film noir on IMDb. So I'm pretty sure that makes it official. We're talking about Murder, My Sweet, directed by Edward Dmytryk, written by John Paxton, based off the novel by Raymond Chandler, starring Dick Powell, Claire Trevor, and Anne Shirley. I'm going to try to sum up the plot. I've watched this movie 3 times, and it's not as confusing as The Big Sleep or something like The Lady from Shanghai, but it's a noir, so it's a little confusing. But we follow Private Detective Philip Marlowe, played by Dick Powell, as he recounts how he's hired by a man named Moose Malloy, played by Mike Mazurki, to find his ex-girlfriend named Velma Valento. He can't find her. He ends up getting hired by another man called Lindsay Marriott to go out into the woods to act as a bodyguard, as a go-between to pay for some stolen jewels. Marriott is gunned down, and Marlowe gets hit over the head one of several times he's knocked unconscious in this movie. And he eventually gets wrapped up in the lives of the Grail family, daughter Anne, played by Anne Shirley, and her father, played by Miles Mander, and his second wife, Helen, played by Claire Trevor. Helen has been robbed of an expensive jade necklace. It all comes back around. Everything eventually ties together. All the stories have come together. But suffice it to say that Philip Marlowe gets caught up in a series of shenanigans involving stolen jewels, gangsters. I'm pretty sure he's roofied at a certain point. Drea, what was your background with this before we recorded?
I saw this in school 15 years ago, 20 years ago, so long ago. And I remember watching it when I was in a course where we were watching numerous noir films. And so it was like, yes, I enjoyed it, but it sort of disappeared amongst them. And then obviously I had ones that I sort of fell in love with in a more glamorous way. Going back to this, my first immediate thing was, oh, Dick Powell is my favorite Philip Marlowe, for sure. What was I ever thinking? There's a cheekiness to him that I found really appealing. It was such a great thing to take advantage of his origins in musicals. And I'm like, oh yeah, the lyricism he brings to the voiceover, which is, iconic. But again, he just has a cheeky winkiness. And the characters just were all interesting and unique in their own ways, in kind of ridiculous ways. Moose is amazing. He's so stupid. There is something so enjoyable about how stupid he is. And then it's set up so well from the beginning. Like, oh, meet this big dumb man. He's slightly scary. Enjoy him. There's just a deliciousness to the characters. So I was really pleased going back to this.
Cheeky winkiness is going to be my new slogan for everything now. Much like you, I came at this around the same time. I saw this in college during a film history class, and we watched this and Kiss Me Deadly as 2 examples of noir. And I've seen this at least 3 times, and I never am 100% into this movie.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, I don't really know why, because I love the Bogey and Bacall, The Big Sleep, and Dark Passage is not the other one, but that's the third one. To Have and Have Not.
Yes.
I mean, I like those movies, and I even love something like Key Largo, which also has Claire Trevor in it. Mm-hmm. I just don't really care for this one, and I think a lot of it is because of Dick Powell.
I'm wondering that you've said that, the cheeky winkiness that I'm referring to, which I enjoy so much, but there's an absence of sex appeal and like sexual chemistry that the other ones you've mentioned definitely have.
I mean, I appreciate noirs. They were never really predicated on pretty boys. You know, noir was really the only genre where you could have an average-looking Joe by Hollywood standards and have them lead a movie. Dick Powell, maybe because I had seen him as a song and dance man before this. 42nd Street, Broadway melody of 19 whatever. I had known him from that. And this was his big test when he had gone over to RKO. He told them that he wanted to be a serious leading man first before he went back to musicals, and he did this movie. I could also have a problem with it because if you've read Joan Blondell's biography, he totally cheated on her and left her for June Allison. So I kind of think he's a scumbag. Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
So rare. So rare for a famous actor to make poor decisions with his love life.
I know. And yes, I do judge them harshly sometimes. Because Joan Blondell, come on.
I mean,
sweetest woman in the world. I don't know. I think there is something compared to Bogart's portrayal, which is a bit more acid-tongued. Mm-hmm. Or something like Robert Mitchum, who does have that sex appeal. Dick Powell's just there.
See, I found him cheeky, and when I say the sex appeal, it's not like, oh, I need to be lusting after them, but there is a spice and that comes with that chemistry between people, and I don't think he definitely did not have chemistry with Claire Trevor. These movies have so many red herrings and so much like double cross and all that. There's a thing where, you know, she puts the moves on him, and it was such a limp, like lackluster moment between them.
There's a very asexual quality to this. I mean, if you watch other noirs like Double Indemnity, which is Fred McMurray, I don't get Fred McMurray lust, but I can understand how that character is perpetuated as a guy who could pull Barbara Stanwyck. Like, I get that. Here, this is a very chaste type of relationship, even though characters talk and act like they're supposed to be, to use the term from 44, making love to each other. You don't really get that, or at least I don't get that. And I also think some of Marlowe's lines are pretty snarky.
Yeah.
He says she was a charming middle-aged lady with a face like a bucket of mud.
Yes.
She was a gal who'd take a drink if she had to knock you down to get the bottom. I'm just thinking, what a jerk.
And those are both about not the housewife, but the woman, the Florian, the widow of the nightclub owner. And he starts describing her before you see her. And all I was thinking was, this poor actress had to read these sides describing her like this. Like, how horrendous. This Philip Marlowe does not seem to be on the prowl or, you know, in the business of seduction as much as other ones. And maybe I guess I'm right. I'm just sort of over male seducers right now is part of the reason I found that especially charming. But there's a funny entire scene where Helen, the second wife, the Claire Trevor wife, she shows up at his place and he's changing and he has just a tank top on. And there's something beautiful. I really do enjoy the physique of the leading man, the lack of muscle tone. And I'm not being ironic. I genuinely enjoy that in older films because I think the concentration on a certain physicality now can be disruptive and not believable. And there's something about like, yeah, this guy's like sort of an okay fit 40-year-old or whatever. But that whole scene is packed with double entendre. Even so, it was very flat to me, but I still enjoyed it because the language of it and the rapport of it. But you're right, it wasn't immersive in the way that you can get lost in that some of the others. Like The Big Sleep, I was enjoying the language, but I was in it. I was swimming in it.
The Big Sleep is probably, if you read the book at least, it's one of the more sex-tinged noirs. The movie is still pretty sexy, but the plot of the film does not revolve around sex as much as the book does. This movie is directed by Edward Dmytryk, who did a lot of war films actioners, predominantly male-based movies. When he tried to do other things, it didn't really work. The year before this, the movie he made before this was Tender Comrade with Ginger Rogers and Robert Ryan. And for having a Dalton Trumbo script, that movie is just not good. It's about these war women whose husbands are in the military, and so they're all living in a house together. It's Ginger Rogers and Ruth Hussey and Patricia Collins, a bunch of other people, and it should have a really good plot, but it just becomes this maudlin type of movie where she's waiting for her husband to come back. It's very, very boring, and Robert Ryan looks way too old to be Ginger Rogers' husband, but that's mostly because Robert Ryan just looked old from the minute he popped up. I would say that the better Edward Dmytryk movie to watch is Crossfire, which I'd love to do at a certain point. He did that after this movie, which has Robert Ryan.
That's Robert Mitchum,
yeah, that's
right?
Robert Ryan, Robert Mitchum, and Robert Young. So you can be confused by all of the Roberts. And
a Robert Triad.
Yes, and it's also got a script by John Paxton, who did this movie. And I think that movie is a better noir because it's got more subtext to it. It's about a man who's murdered by a group of soldiers. The eventual reason you find out is that they're anti-Semitic. And in the original novel, I think it was because they were homophobes. But it's got this, like, deep subtext that's really rich. And I don't think you get that here. Because much like with most Raymond Chandler novels, you have to keep the plot straight. I mean, just hearing me try to sum up the plot of this movie was hard. Because you have 3 stories that don't seem like they should go together, but they do. So you have the Moose storyline, where he's trying to find his ex-girlfriend. He served 8 years in prison, but she stopped writing, 6 years ago, and he's trying to find her. The landlady says that she's dead, but he sees the landlady make a phone call, so obviously something's going on. And then you have the Grails and the Jade, and then you have Marriott and the murder, and then you have this other character called Amthor. So you have all these different balls you got to juggle with a good noir that happens, but this is a movie that is really devoid of something that makes me zone out, so that I don't remember who Amthor is.
Interesting. I felt that the interconnecting made sense to me. The Moose part was obviously the one that was the most wedged in, but there's something about his presence. I'm like, oh, yeah.
He's supposed to be the big heavy.
Yeah, and so he is big and scary and just out of prison, so it does not surprise me that guy has somehow wandered into this other bad guy's realm and is, like, working for him in some way. So those things made sense to me, and I didn't find it too pat how the revelations at the end of what did connect them. I really wish they'd explored more the idea of Amthor's background, the idea that he was this psychic healer, psychiatrist sort of, but only for rich women, and was getting them to detail the jewels they had. But I was like, that's fantastic. That's such a funny, especially for that time and place where psychiatry was at, the people that would have access to it. It's like, that's a great scam. That's really interesting to me. I was trucking along with all of them. Like you were saying, the femme fatale can be dismissed as a negative archetype of just standing in for male fears, which I don't believe. I think that they often have a great sense of agency, and I certainly enjoyed Helen in this. She goes deep evil, and I'm fine with that. I liked the balance of having the Anne Shirley character, of having a good girl who was maybe a little questionable as well. Like, there were nice little misdirections and moments of wondering if she was trustworthy, but not in a huge way, just in a way that kind of moved.
Claire Trevor is really the unsung hero of this movie in a way. I love her so much. She's so good. She's good in everything, though. I mean, you go all the way back to something like Stagecoach.
Oh, Stagecoach is heartbreaking.
Stagecoach is so good. Or the movie she did after this in Key Largo, where she's playing just this pathetic drunk. Or even another noir, something like Born to Kill, which is a very different Noir from this. So I think she's great. What I appreciate about Femme Fatales, this is a bad example because I think there are two different motivations with these characters, but they're somewhat similar. I think of Helen the way I think of like Cora Smith in Postman, where this is a woman that had a really hard life and has married this older man because she's just sick of struggling.
Yep.
But yet she's still persecuted because she doesn't want to struggle anymore.
No, I think that there's interesting things about Helen's character. On a lot of levels, she's sympathetic. It brings to light the idea of worth. And listening to the very frail husband talk about how nice it is to have such a beautiful wife and a wife that everyone desires. And I'm like, well, you're kind of the asshole. Like, I realize I'm supposed to look and have nothing but sympathy for this man who's sort of being played for a fool. But to me, there's a very subtle critique there of, if you're going to be the kind of narrow, ridiculously obsessed with appearances person that's going to marry someone because they're beautiful and desired by others, maybe your jade necklace gets stolen. Maybe you get to lose part of your whole, egg nest egg.
Nest egg, yeah. I like egg nest. I'm keeping that along with cheeky windiness. Nice. But even Helen has a moment where she tries to explain her motivations, where she says she married this guy, but she still likes to go out with men. She's still a sexual being. She still wants to go out. She's young. She's not allowed that because she's, according to the movie, sold her soul for money. So, she's not allowed to have that. But Marlowe is taking full advantage of that. She shows up late at night and he's willing to pretend that he's into her. And because it's 1944, you're really not sure how far he was willing to go and probably roll your eyes at it. He still plays into it. I think the problem that I have, and it might be a petty problem, is that most noirs really become about how every woman wants you.
Yeah.
And I do feel that there is this element of, even though the women are playing him, they still all want to be on him. And you have Anne, played by Anne Shirley, who is the nice girl. If you watch Double Indemnity, she's the daughter that, if she had more of a personality. Right. And Anne is really only interested in keeping Helen out of trouble, she says, because she's fond of her father and her father's fond of Helen. And so you do get this duty-bound nature to her, but her duty is to the guys. The guys that have benefited her. I like that Helen is just like, nobody's benefited me. Every guy that I've been with has abandoned me, so screw it. I'm just going to be out for myself and take care of myself. That should be revered.
That's why I applaud her going full evil at the end, is that she's mercenary in a way that puts herself first. The very interesting parts of Anne's character, to me, are the moments where I wasn't fully sure, maybe she's covering for the father.
I thought she did it at one point, even though I was like, I've seen this. Right. I thought maybe, Anne had been pulling the strings all the time.
Well, those are fun. I like those little keeping you on your toes with that. But yeah, as a character, Helen's more interesting. And even Anne, there's the whole thing at the end because Marlowe's been blinded by these gunshots that are so close to his eyes. He has this, this extended sequence where he doesn't know that she's there, but he's talking about her. And I'm like, that is such a funny, these are all male writers, of course, but that's such a funny female fantasy of, I just want to hear him speaking well of me when he doesn't know I'm there. Like, it's the smallest crumbs of someone doing something for you.
Of course, the movie ends with them kissing, and you're just like, he knows he's not making out with a man, but, I was like, okay, I'm a little confused. But Anne Shirley, she does good with the role. Yeah. I would not say this is her best work. Even though this was her last film, I don't know if it's necessarily her best film. She started out acting under the name Dawn O'Day. She was a child star, and she made her debut at the age of 5 as the live-action Alice in Walt Disney's animated Alice in Cartoonland. And then she started working in pre-codes, stuff like Williams, So Big, 3 on a Match, Rasputin and the Empress. 3 on a Match, she's the daughter that they're all fighting over when Anne Vorek kills herself. Spoiler alert. In 1934, she was the character Anne Shirley in Anne of Green Gables and took that as her name. Most people know she did Stella Dallas in 1937, which we almost did. We almost did Stella Dallas, and I didn't do it because I know it's 1937, and I shouldn't complain about feminism, but Stella Dallas bothers me.
Stella Dallas in small ways, not entirely. I don't know Anne Shirley's whole life, but the idea of Anne Shirley's mother pushing her as an actress so young to make her succeed so she could support the family, to me, in small baby ways, compares to like Stella Dallas, the idea of this mom who's needing her child to succeed in these very specific ways. I mean, that one's more sacrificial. There's weird class things to look at with Stella Dallas. It's tangly.
And I feel Stella Dallas is just a precursor for Mildred Pierce, which I think is a better take on the sacrificial mom. But it did get Anne Shirley an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She did not win. And then she was just in a bunch of stuff. She did Anne of Windy Poplars, Devil and Daniel Webster, and then she did this movie. She married John Payne in 1937, who also did a lot of noirs, and he's also a guy I don't get. They had a daughter, and then she married the film producer Adrian Scott, but he was blacklisted during the 50s and wanted to move the family to Europe, and she wrote him a Dear John letter saying that she wanted to stay in America, so they should probably just get divorced. And then her third husband was Charles Lederer, who was a well-known screenwriter. He was also Marion Davies' nephew, and they had a child. And I want to say they stayed married until he died. In between all of those relationships, she also had some flings with Rory Calhoun and Jean-Pierre Aumont. Not quite such a good girl, and I like that. I think that makes me like her more.
A life widely lived. How's that?
But here, she's just the nice girl. That's okay. We need nice girls in these movies.
There's not a lot to dig into, other than those few moments when you wonder if she's trying to pull something over on him. She's this very nervous, I'm worried about my father. It's a nice girl with a tinge of timidity that's not as exciting to watch as, obviously, a slightly sociopathic narcissist like Helen.
I'm going to say, really, all of these characters are incidental to the roofie sequence.
Thank you. I'm so glad you got to that, because it is amazing.
Drea, why don't you set up the scene?
So he has been kidnapped by Amthor's people, and he's kind of insinuated that he knows where this jade necklace is. I love it, by the way, the Noir thing, like, we never see this necklace. It's so good.
It's the MacGuffin everybody just talks about.
It's so wonderful. So he's implied that he knows where it is, and so he's basically kidnapped and taken to this shady, weird doctor who drugs him up. And the way that they show his state of mind, he keeps talking about how he sees smoke everywhere, but they've put like cobweb looking things, like physically.
I was going to say, it looks like water ripples almost on the lens.
Oh, interesting. It read very much to me like cobwebs almost, but water ripples is probably more what they wanted. They make such an effort, like such an artistic effort, to demonstrate this psychological and drugged haze he's in. I think it's a beautiful sequence. It starts like he wakes up in this hospital bed, he decides he's going to escape, but he's still very groggy. The voiceover comes in, the very familiar voiceover, and he's like, and then I put my shoes on and I walked. I couldn't tell you how far I'd walked. It pans up from his feet and he's still in the same room. He's just been like shuffling in front of a door. I thought it was a beautiful depiction of his mental state. He manages to escape. He confronts the doctor. I wanted him to take a nap so badly after this whole sequence. It was that believable and visceral to me that I was like, oh man, this guy needs some sleep. But instead he goes and has a drink and changes his suit.
There's a subtle bit of humor there.
Yeah.
it really plays as this grand operatic sequence, but really he could just be enacting every drunk person's Bender.
Right. I liked that visually, because sometimes it can be jarring in a film when they have one sequence like this, but nothing else that's reflective at all. But they had this recurring thing because the man keeps getting hit on the head.
He should have quite the hematoma by the end of this.
He has big time concussion problems. He not just gets hit on the head numerous times, every time he gets hit on the head, he refers to this, is it a black pool? That he's like the black wave washes over me again.
The black pool, yeah, and I dived in.
And I dove in, yes. And that's brought up on screen as this black visual. So it's not just a normal sort of fade to black or wipe to black like they do this. So there's a couple instances of them that makes this more grounded. That's why I'm saying the cheekiness, there's a sense of humor. It's not a pure threat. I never felt really a threat of
I never feel like anything bad's gonna happen. If anything, I think like something might have like not chill happened to him. Right. And he might want to file a police report afterwards, but that's about it.
And maybe that's what you're talking to, of not having enough to hold on to. I guess I feel enough tension in the world at large right now that I was really responding to something that managed to be a detective story without a huge sense of threat or urgency, but that kept moving along. So I was fine with that.
Sometimes the style of this movie, the desire to want to do new things like that sequence with the camera, which almost feels like it's mimicking the Dali sequences from Spellbound, which I think came out the year after this. I felt like it was a little too much style over substance.
The tricky part is when you're combining that level of style, but with a performer and a tone that's more fun than it is threatening. That's maybe where the discord is. If you have that style with threat, then you have, Hitchcock. It's a different a balance of those things. So maybe it was a little tonally off-putting.
This was remade in 1975. They remade it as Farewell, My Lovely, which was the title of the novel as well as the title in England. They did not title it that here. It's got Robert Mitchum as Philip Marlowe. I have not seen that version, but it sounds interesting. I don't know. Maybe it does something different. Although it's 1975, so it could just be weirder.
Yeah, I've not seen it either, so I guess I should wait to make my Philip Marlowe vote until I see Mitchum.
That's true, before we can compare. Anything else we want to touch on before we close it out?
Well, as long as it comes across how much I love Moose, obviously, you know me as enough now to know that clearly my favorite character in the whole thing is the boy that works in the elevator who keeps just letting people into his office. There's nothing I like better than the side character that's given the chance to be just a little bit ridiculous. The other thing that I think is interesting in this that is just the idea of how he works with the cops. I think there's something interesting in a lot of noir of needing to take the law into your own hands, and he's disdainful of them, but also really kind of working with them, if that makes any sense. There's something interesting there about normally cops are dullards that are 12 steps behind, and these cops are kind of right there with them, which is nice.
Well, overall, what do we think about this movie? Drea, do you recommend people check it out? Do you think it's good? What are your thoughts?
I really responded to the levity of this kind of story, and that's primarily in his performance. And I think there's something fun about it. That as much as, this story can meander a bit, I think it moves along, and it's a nice view. I would definitely recommend this.
I have seen this movie 3 times. I like it. I can't ever really muster above a like. I do think Claire Trevor is the reason to watch. Anne Shirley's good, but I don't feel this is really her movie. I'm sure there are far better representations of her talents that we could have picked, but we wanted to do this one. But I think this is all about Claire Trevor. Dick Powell, he's never going to be my favorite. Never. I'm sorry. Much like Joseph Cotton, it's not working.
More for me. That's fair.
It's a foundational noir. It's referenced all the time when you're talking about the genre, so you really do need to see it. It's worthwhile. Listeners, send me your thoughts on Murder My Sweet, Noirvember, your love for Dick Powell, all of that. You can email that to me at ticklishbiz@gmail.com, and I'll read them on a future episode. We did have some mentions on our Twitter. We had asked people to list some of their favorite film noirs in honor of Noirvember, so we're going to read a couple to you. From @CindyMcMahon3, she writes, Out of the Past and The Maltese Falcon. Those are two that are fantastic. I love Out of the Past. That's a great one.
I haven't seen Out of the Past, so I'm going to take that as a recommendation.
I don't know if you can come back on the podcast until you've seen it.
Who knew that I'd be spending all this time ignoring Robert Mitchum?
I know. Something
up.
Really wrong there. @Stacy Kendro writes, The Big Heat. I have not seen The Big Heat. I feel terrible.
These are great. These are...
Now I have an assignment.
Yes. Assignments are good. Yeah, no, that's a classic. That's got all of the crackling chemistry, the sexual chemistry. That's all there.
And our patron, Peter Bryant @PMBryant writes, My two favorite noirs are on the boundaries of noir. Roadhouse, 1948, and Moontide from 1942, both starring Ida Lupino. Moontide is a particularly unique film, but the atmosphere is undeniably noir to me. Murder My Sweet and The Maltese Falcon are also very high on my list. I am so happy someone said Ida.
Ida Lupino is the best, and then he had two Idas.
Roadhouse is great. I just saw that one a couple weeks ago, and it's such a good movie. Moontide, I did not care for, mostly because I believe that one is Jean Gabin, who does not seem like he fits in the noir, American noir mold, at least, for me.
I've not seen Moontide.
It's weird. It's worth it. It's an odd little film worth watching. I think it's noir. Somebody's going to yell at me, but I have to include it. The Seawolf is great with Ida Lupino. I think that's a little noir-y. Somebody's...
Interesting.
My mom's probably rolling her eyes thinking my obligatory John Garfield reference of the podcast, but I still think it counts. So, of course, you can send in your tweets and emails, all of that, to me, and I'll read them on the next episode. As always, Drea, it is great to have you back on the show. Why don't you throw out some of the other things you're doing? Where can fans find to get in touch with you? All of that.
I am on Twitter at the Drea Clark, and I'm currently programming for Sundance, so watching a ton of episodics for that. So that is what I'm busy with this fall.
That's going to close out this edition of Ticklish Business. As always, you can listen to Ticklish Business a variety of different ways, either directly at ticklishbusiness.podbean.com, via Stitcher Radio and Player FM, or iTunes. If you're listening via iTunes, please consider helping the podcast out by leaving a rating and review. As always, you can contact me directly with questions, comments, suggestions at ticklishbiz, that's B-I-Z, @gmail.com, or visit me at my official website where I discuss classic films regularly, journeysinclassicfilm.com. The podcast is also on Twitter at ticklish_biz. Want to learn more about upcoming episodes or hear exclusive content before anyone else? Then consider supporting Ticklish Business via Patreon. I have a wealth of amazing perks ranging from Twitter shoutouts to an actual newsletter, and all your donations go straight back into making Ticklish Business the premier classic film podcast it is. If you become a patron right now, you can listen to the episodes for my two new supplementary shows. Co-host William Bibiani and I look at how Hollywood talks about itself in cinema with the show based on a true podcast. Our latest episode looks at Shadow of a Vampire and questions whether Max Schreck in the making of that movie is actually true. Spoiler, it's not, but it makes for a very fun episode. And you can also hear Adam Kautzer and I talk about all three versions of The Bad Seed from 1956, 1985, and 2018 on our show Doubled Features, where we look at movies Hollywood likes to make again and again and again. You can also check out all the other content that's been on there before, including previous interviews, all sorts of stuff. But if you're interested in becoming a patron, just head over to patreon.com/ticklishbiz. And if you want to learn more about the stars turning 100 this year, and you're a member of TCM's exclusive fan club, TCM Backlot, then you can read my year-long series about the stars spotlighted here. I talk about films and information that you won't hear on the podcast. But next time, we're celebrating Thanksgiving, and what better way to do that than have Samantha Ellis and I get on board the Mayflower and travel to 1952's Plymouth Adventure. Till next time.